Two countries, both in Asia, both with colonial histories, both with diverse, multilingual populations, both independent for roughly the same amount of time. One of them has a space program, nuclear weapons, the world's largest democracy, and an economy that regularly makes global headlines. It has produced some of the most brilliant scientists, engineers, and business leaders on the planet. Its cultural influence stretches across every continent. The other one is smaller than many Indian states. Its entire population would barely fill one of India's major cities. It has no nuclear program, no permanent seat at the global superpower table. And yet, if you landed in both countries tomorrow with no prior knowledge, one of them would feel dramatically more developed than the other. And it would not be the bigger one. Now, before anyone reaches for the comment section, this video is not an attack on India. India is one of the most fascinating, complex, and consequential nations in human history. What this video is an honest, uncomfortable question. Why does Malaysia, with a fraction of India's size, resources, and population, feel like a more developed country to live in day to day? The answer is more complicated than you think, and it will challenge what you believe about how nations actually develop. Stay with me. First, let us put the actual data on the table. India's economy is the fifth largest in the world by nominal GDP. It is a genuine global powerhouse with an economy worth over $3 trillion. Its tech sector, pharmaceutical industry, and manufacturing base are world-class. Malaysia's entire economy is roughly the size of one large Indian state. In absolute numbers, there is no comparison. But here's where it gets interesting. GDP per capita, which measures the average economic output per person, tells a completely different story. Malaysia's GDP per capita is roughly 5 to 6 times higher than India's. The average Malaysian earns, on paper, significantly more than the average Indian. Life expectancy in Malaysia is higher. Infant mortality is lower. Access to clean water, reliable electricity, and sanitation infrastructure is dramatically better across the population. The Human Development Index, which combines income, education, and life expectancy into a single number, consistently ranks Malaysia far above India. Oh yes, India has a bigger economy, but Malaysia has built a better quality of life for its average citizen. And that difference is not small. It is enormous. The question is why? Here is the controversial part, and I want you to hear this fully before you react. India's population is both its greatest asset and its most complex challenge. 1.4 billion people, the largest population on Earth, an enormous labor force, a massive domestic consumer market, the raw material of a superpower. But 1.4 billion people also means 1.4 billion people who need clean water, healthcare, education, roads, jobs, electricity, housing. The infrastructure requirements of that scale are almost incomprehensible. India has to build, maintain, and expand services for a population that adds more people every year than the entire population of Malaysia. Malaysia, by contrast, manages roughly 33 million people. That is a number a focused, well-resourced government can actually plan around. Roads can reach most communities. Schools can be staffed. Hospitals can be built at a ratio that serves the population. When India builds something impressive, a world-class airport, a gleaming metro system, a high-tech business district, it is genuinely impressive. But it is surrounded by the reality of a country that cannot yet provide that standard everywhere, for everyone, all at once. Malaysia does not have to solve that problem. And that difference in scale explains more than almost any other factor why the two countries feel so different on the ground. But scale is not the whole story, because there are small countries that are also poorly developed. Population alone does not explain Malaysia's success. Malaysia made specific policy choices, early and consistently, that India either delayed, debated, or implemented unevenly. Infrastructure as a national priority. From the 1980s onward, Malaysia built roads, highways, ports, and airports with a consistency and speed that transformed connectivity across the peninsula. The North-South Expressway, KLIA, Putrajaya, these were not just vanity projects. They were the physical skeleton of a modern economy. India has made enormous infrastructure investments in recent years, but decades of underinvestment left a gap that is still being closed. Education and industrial alignment. Malaysia deliberately aligned its education and training systems with the needs of its industrial economy. When it decided to become a manufacturing hub, it built technical schools and universities to produce the workers those factories needed. India produced world-class engineers and doctors, but for decades, much of that talent left. The domestic economy did not absorb them fast enough. Bureaucratic efficiency. Starting a business, registering property, and accessing government services in Malaysia is, by regional and global standards, relatively straightforward. Malaysia consistently ranks among the top countries in the World Bank's ease of doing business indicators. India, despite significant recent improvements, has historically ranked far lower. Red tape, corruption at the local level, and regulatory complexity have added friction to economic activity at every level. Here is something that will make some people uncomfortable. The British left both countries at roughly the same time, and what they left behind was not identical. In Malaysia, British colonialism was largely extractive, rubber, tin trade, but it also left behind a relatively functional administrative infrastructure concentrated along the peninsula's west coast. A small, manageable territory with established ports, rail lines, and administrative systems that a new government could inherit and build on. In India, the British left behind something far more complicated. A vast subcontinent of extraordinary diversity, hundreds of languages, dozens of major ethnic and religious groups, princely states that had to be integrated, and a partition that tore the country in two and caused one of the largest humanitarian disasters of the 20th century. India spent its first decade of independence managing crises Malaysia never faced. Partition, refugee movements, wars with neighbors, the integration of over 500 princely states into a single nation. Malaysia had its own serious challenges: the communist insurgency, the 1969 ethnic riots, confrontation with Indonesia. But the scale of what India had to manage at birth was categorically different. Development does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in the context of history. And India's history gave it a far more difficult starting point than most comparisons acknowledge. Now, because this channel does not do one-sided arguments, let us talk about where India is genuinely ahead. And it is not nothing. India's technology sector is world-class in a way Malaysia's is not. Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune have produced global companies and supplied talent to every major tech firm on Earth. Malaysia has a solid tech sector, but it is not in the same conversation as India's software industry. India's scientific and space capabilities are extraordinary. The Indian Space Research Organization has achieved missions, including a successful lunar South Pole landing in 2023, that place India among a handful of nations with genuine deep space capability. Malaysia has no equivalent program. India's domestic market is so large that it can sustain industries that would be impossible in Malaysia. Bollywood is a global cultural industry. Indian pharmaceutical companies supply medicines to the entire developing world. The scale of India's domestic demand creates economic possibilities that Malaysia simply cannot replicate. And India's democratic institutions, however imperfect and however stressed, represent something genuinely rare and valuable. A country of 1.4 billion people, of extraordinary diversity, that has held elections, transferred power, and maintained constitutional governance for over 70 years. That is an achievement Malaysia, with its one-party dominance for 6 decades, cannot claim in the same way. Here is the truth that this comparison ultimately reveals. Development is not a race, and bigger does not mean better. India and Malaysia are not really competing. They are two completely different experiments in nation building, different in scale, history, complexity, and ambition. Comparing them as if one is simply ahead and one is simply behind misses the entire point. What Malaysia teaches the world is that a small, focused, well-governed state can deliver quality of life outcomes that outperform countries many times its size. What India teaches the world is that managing complexity at an almost incomprehensible scale and still growing, still innovating, still holding together is its own kind of extraordinary achievement. The uncomfortable question this video asks is not which country is better. It is this: if India applied Malaysia's governance discipline to even a fraction of its population, what would be possible? And if Malaysia had India's scale, ambition, and scientific culture, would it have stayed as focused? Neither country has fully answered those questions yet. India is bigger. Malaysia feels more developed. And both of those things are true at the same time, without one canceling out the other. The real story is not about which country won. It is about what choices nations make when they have limited time, limited resources, and unlimited problems. Malaysia chose focus. India chose scale. And the world is better for having both experiments running simultaneously. If this video challenged the way you think about development, that is exactly the point. Hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells us to keep making content that goes deeper than the surface. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we ask the questions about nations and economies that most channels are too careful to ask. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think India will close the development gap in the next 20 years? Or does scale make that nearly impossible? I want to read what you think. I will see you in the next one.